trampled and bleeding in the cattle yard. A cowboy carried her out and gave her healing hands. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Not screaming, I want to be clear about that. Women scream when they're scared. What came out of that cattle yard was something else. A single, high, torn-off cry, the kind a person makes when the air gets knocked clean out of them and there's nothing left to push sound through. Then nothing. Just the cattle moving, the low bawl of a confused steer, hooves on packed dirt. I was on the fence rail when it happened, 30 yards off, tallying head with Orson Prute's boy who couldn't count past 12 without losing his place. I didn't think. My legs were already moving before my brain told them to. The gate latch caught the first time, and I hit it with my shoulder and went in. She was down in the far corner, half under the railing, one of Prute's big roan steers circling away from her, spooked now and tossing his head. The others were bunching at the opposite end. I came in low, moving along the fence, not running. You don't run in a cattle yard with spooked animals, and I got between her and the roan, and I pushed my hat out wide and turned the animal. He pivoted, went to join the others. Then I went to her. She was face down in the dirt. Her left arm was bent wrong. Right away from 10 feet, I could see that much. I got down beside her and I said, real quiet, "I'm going to put my hand on your back, don't move yet." She didn't answer, but she was breathing. I could see it, the shallow rise and fall of her shoulders, and I put my hand flat between her shoulder blades and felt it. Felt her alive underneath my palm, and something in me that had clenched hard went loose again. "Can you hear me?" A sound, not a word, something. "I'm going to check you before we move anything. You stay still." I ran my hands along her neck first, then her spine, careful and slow, the way my father had taught me on cattle that went down wrong in a ditch. You find the bad thing before you move anything, or you make it worse. Her spine felt right. Her neck felt right. I worked down both arms, the right was fine, the left I barely touched, and she made that sound again, the air knocked out sound, and I said, I know. Don't move it." Her ribs on the left side. I pressed, gentle as I knew how, and felt one shift that shouldn't have shifted, and I pulled my hand away. "All right," I said. "I'm going to carry you out. You let me do the work." She turned her head then, the first time I saw her face. Dirt pressed into her cheek, a cut above her eye already swelling, and she looked at me with the most direct eyes I'd seen on a person in a long time. Dark eyes, not brown, somewhere between brown and black, the color of creek water in October. She was maybe 30, maybe less. And she was looking at me the way someone looks when they're trying to decide if they can trust a thing. "I'm not going to drop you," I said, and I don't know why I said it exactly, except that seemed like the thing to say. She gave a small nod, one nod, and then she let me. "My name is Cal Briggs. I was 57 years old that autumn. I'd worked Prute's spread for 11 years, before that the Halcott Range over by Mineral Creek, before that a stretch of years I don't talk about much that took me through 3 different states and left me with a bad knee, a crooked finger on my right hand, and a particular way of reading whether that's never been wrong yet. I wasn't a foreman, never wanted to be. Foremen have to talk to people. I was a ranch hand, the kind you keep because they know the work better than you do and they don't need telling twice. I had a bunk in the north barn loft, kept to myself, ate with the other men when there was food put out and alone the rest of the time. Orson Prute's wife, Deb, used to say I was the most self-sufficient creature she'd ever seen, meaning it as a compliment and meaning it as something else too, something she was too polite to say directly. Meaning, you are alone in a way that is your own choosing, and that is a peculiar thing. She wasn't wrong. I'd been married, long time back, Ellie. We had 4 years and then 1 winter, and then I had none of it anymore, and I made my peace with that the only way I knew how, which was to fill every hour with work and let the years go by until I stopped reaching for things that weren't there. That's not wisdom. That's just what happens when you're too stubborn to fall apart and too tired to rebuild something. So that's who was carrying Clara Voss out of Prute's cattle yard on a Thursday morning in October. Her name I got from Deb Prute, who met me at the yard gate with her hands already up like she could catch something. "That's Clara Voss. Oh Lord, oh Cal, is she? She's breathing, left arm's broke, at least 1 rib, maybe 2. She needs a doctor. Doc Hennessy's in Calder, that's 4 hours. Get someone writing." I carried her to the barn, not the north barn, the south one, where Deb kept a room set up for sick animals and sometimes sick people, with a cot and a shelf of salves and clean rags and the smell of pine tar and dried lavender. I set Clara down on the cot as gently as I have ever set anything down in my life, keeping her left side up, and I folded a blanket under her head, and she made a sound like the pressure of it helped, and I thought, good. "Don't move that arm," I told her. "I'm not stupid," she said, first full sentence. "No," I said, "I can see that." Deb came in behind me. "Clara, sweetheart, what were you doing in that yard? Those are breeding steers, you know Orson keeps those." "The gate was open," Clara said. Her voice was thin, pressed down by the pain, but the words came out clear. "I was trying to close it. I didn't want the animals loose on the road." I looked at Deb. She looked back at me. "Who left that gate open?" I said. "I don't know," but Deb's eyes went sideways when she said it, and I filed that away. "You're a neighbor?" I asked Clara. She turned those dark eyes on me. The swelling above her brow was purpling up. "My husband's land runs the north edge of this property. He died in August." "August was 2 months back." I said nothing. "Widow Voss," Deb said quietly, like she was reminding herself of something. "Of course, I should have gone by. I'm sorry, Clara." Clara didn't answer that. She was watching me. "You the one who came in after me?" she said. "Yes." "You moved the cattle away first?" "Yes." "Before you came to me?" "If I'd come straight to you and the animals spooked again, we'd both be on the ground." I paused. "You'd have done the same." Something happened in her face that wasn't quite a smile. The cut above her eye was seeping. I picked up a rag from the shelf, dipped it in the water Deb had put out, and I brought it to the cut and held it there with 2 fingers, not pressing, just resting, and she didn't flinch. "I'm going to clean this," I said. "All right." Doc Hennessy arrived 4 hours later smelling of tobacco and horse sweat, and assessed the situation with the brisk efficiency of a man who has been called to worse. He set the arm. Clara made no sound, just closed her eyes and breathed through her nose, and bound the ribs and put 6 small stitches above her eye and told her she'd need 2 weeks off her feet, or nearly. "I can't be off my feet," she said. "I've got a ranch." "You've got 2 cracked ribs and a freshly set radius. You'll be off your feet or you'll make both worse and be off them for 2 months. She looked at him, she looked at the ceiling. "Who's going to manage the stock?" "You hire someone." "I can't afford to hire someone." Hennessy packed his bag. He was not an unkind man, but he'd said what he had to say, and he was done with it. "That's not a medical problem." He looked at me. "Don't let her lift anything heavier than a cup." He left. Clara lay there on the cot with her arms splinted and her ribs bound, and she stared at the ceiling with the expression of someone calculating in their head, figuring angles, refusing to arrive at the number that was actually in front of them. Deb stood in the doorway. She was looking at me. I understood what the look meant. I'm not sure I understand why I answered it. "How many head?" I said to Clara. She turned to look at me. 14 cattle, 3 horses, 20-some chickens." "Any hired hand?" "Buddy Crane, he's 17. Good worker, but he doesn't know cattle medicine." I looked at my hands, the right one with the crooked finger, the left one roughed up from years of fence wire and cold, and 100 things I'd held too tight or not tight enough. "I'll ride over mornings," I said. "Before the brute work, an hour, maybe 2. Deb made a small sound, not quite surprise. Clara studied me for a moment. "Why?" "Because you tried to close a gate that wasn't yours to close and got hurt for it." I picked up my hat from where I'd set it on the shelf. "And because Orson Prute's boy left that gate open, and somebody ought to account for that, even if they won't." She was quiet for a while. "I don't need charity." "I know you don't. It's not charity. It's one rancher looking after another rancher's property while she heals." I paused. "If it makes you feel better, I'll take a meal for it." That thing happened in her face again, almost a smile. "I'm not much of a cook right now." "Buddy Crane can cook. Most 17-year-old boys can cook if they have to." So that's how it started. I want to tell this right. I want to tell it the way it actually happened, and not the way it sounds when you say it plain, because when you say it plain it sounds like something it wasn't, not yet. I wasn't going over there because of her. I wasn't going over there because I had designs or intentions or any of the foolish things men my age are supposed to have set aside. I went because it was the right thing to do. Because I was a man who knew cattle, and she was a woman with 14 head and 2 cracked ribs and no one else to call on. That's all. Or that's what I told myself, riding north on my dun gelding, trapper, in the cold blue dark of 5 in the morning for the first week. The Voss place was 3 miles up from Prout's north fence. Small operation but neat, the kind of neat that tells you somebody cared about it, had built it from attention and not just from money. The barn was sound. The fence posts were solid, no lean. The house was a 2-room frame with a porch that needed 1 board replaced, and there were chickens already moving in the gray light when I rode up, and Buddy Crane was at the pump looking embarrassed to be seen. "Mr. Briggs," he said, "Mrs. Voss said you'd be coming." "Show me the cattle." He showed me the cattle, 14 head mixed breed, a couple of good milk cows and the rest beef stock. Healthy. A little underweight from, I didn't say it out loud, but I thought it, from a summer of inadequate management. Which is what happens when a man dies in August, and his wife is keeping everything running alone for 2 months while the whole territory does everything except actually show up and help. I found 3 fence posts that needed resetting. I found a water trough with a slow leak. I found one of the beef cows with a hoof that needed trimming. I did the fence posts and the trough that first morning and came back the next for the hoof, and the morning after that I rode up and Clara Voss was sitting on the porch with her arm in its sling and a cup of something hot in her good hand, watching the sun come up over the ridge. I tied Trapper to the post. I didn't say anything for a moment, neither did she. "How are the ribs?" I said. "Better." "You're not in the barns." "I know I'm not in the barn." "Good." I went to the barn. I could feel her watching me from the porch. I didn't turn around. Her husband had been a man named Garrett Voss. I pieced this together over mornings, not from her. She didn't volunteer much, but from Buddy, who talked the way 17-year-olds do when they're nervous, filling silence. Garrett Voss had been a good man by Buddy's account, which is to say he paid on time and didn't yell. He'd been sick the better part of spring and then sicker in summer and then dead in August, and the doctor in Calder had called it a weakness of the heart, which is a polite way of saying a man died younger than he should have. He and Clara had been married 6 years. No children. The land was hers in name because Garrett had made it that way, Buddy said, put it in her name before he died. He was smart like that, Buddy said. He knew. I thought about that. A man who knows he's dying, making sure his wife can hold the land. That's a particular kind of love, the kind that looks ahead past itself. "Did she have family?" I asked. "Her mother somewhere east, a brother, but he and Mrs. Voss don't talk." I didn't ask why. The second week I started staying longer. Prout didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything. I did twice the work in my regular hours that most men do, and he knew it, and there was a kind of unspoken accounting between us that had settled into the 11 years. I fixed the Voss porch board. I got the milk cows on a better schedule. I showed Buddy how to read an animal's eyes when it's going off its feed. Clara watched all this from whatever vantage point her ribs allowed. Sometimes the porch, sometimes from the barn door, sometimes from the kitchen window when I rode in at first light. She didn't make a fuss of my being there. She didn't thank me too much, which I respected. Some people thank you so much it becomes its own kind of weight, and I'd have had to stop coming if that's what she was. What she did was talk to me. Not at first. For the first 10 days it was mostly yes and no and an occasional practical question about the cattle. But there was an evening in the 3rd week. I'd stayed late to help Buddy pull a calf that came sideways, and we'd been at it an hour, and the cow was fine, and the calf was fine, and I was washing up at the pump in the dark. And Clara came out of the house with a lantern and a plate of food, and she sat down on the barn step and watched me eat standing up, and she started talking. She talked about Garrett, not the loss of him, not the grief, not directly, but the man, the specific material fact of him. How he'd built the barn himself one summer with 2 neighbors and a lot of swearing. How he couldn't whistle but tried anyway. How he'd had a particular way of looking at a sick animal that was more intuition than knowledge, and how he'd been right more often than he should have been. I listened. I'm a good listener, always have been. Most men aren't. Most men are waiting for their turn to talk. I don't have a turn I'm waiting for. "He would have liked you," she said finally. "Maybe," I said. "Not maybe, he would have." She looked at the lantern flame. "He liked men who were competent and didn't make noise about it." I ate. The food was good, stewed beef, potatoes, something with dried herbs in it that gave it a particular warmth. Better than anything Deb Prout put out, and considerably better than what I made for myself in the north barn loft. "You're a good cook," I said. "I thought I told you Buddy was the cook." "You said he could cook if he had to." She smiled. That's the first time I can say for certain it was a smile, not the almost smile from the cot in Prout's barn. A real one, small and closed mouth, gone almost as quick as it came. I can do some things left-handed, she said. I'm not entirely useless. I never said you were. Ellie had been gone 16 years at that point. I say that not because it's relevant exactly, but because I want to be honest about where I was standing when all this happened. 16 years since I'd sat with a woman in the evening and talked and felt the ordinary comfort of it, of not being alone, not working, just being present in the same place as another person with their own life and their own thoughts. 16 years of bunks in barns and camps, and one miserable winter in a rooming house in a town whose name I have since stopped using. I had gotten very good at not wanting things. That's not nothing. Some men can't do it. They go sour or they go desperate and they make ugly decisions or they just drink themselves to quiet, and I'd seen enough of all three of those. I'd built something better than that, I thought. A life with clean lines, no complications, no one to disappoint. I was good at the work. The work was honest. That was enough. You hear yourself say something like that enough times. You stop noticing what it is you're actually saying. 3 weeks after the cattle yard, Clara stood up without help for the first time without her face going white. I saw it from across the yard. She didn't see me see it, and she stood straight for a moment and breathed and then looked out at the ridge with something in her eyes I recognized. The look of a person coming back into themselves, like watching a fire catch from a coal. Her arm was still splinted, would be for another 4 weeks, but she started doing small things, things she could manage with one hand, feeding the chickens, checking the fence posts, standing in the barn doorway while Buddy and I worked so she could tell us things we might have missed. She didn't miss much. That heifer's going to go early, she told me one morning, chin toward the far stall. Garrett always said when they hold their tail that way. 3rd day in a row, I said, I know. I've been watching her. She looked at me sidelong. I was going to say that tonight, I said. Then we're in agreement. I kept my eyes on the heifer. How long was he sick before he died? She was quiet. The whole spring he was slowing down. I thought it was age, but he was only 41. A pause. By June I knew. He knew before I did, I think. And you managed the stock through all of that. What else was there to do? That wasn't a question. It didn't need to be. I understood doing is its own answer to grief, to fear, to everything you can't fix. You get up and you work and you do the thing in front of you because you cannot do the thing you actually want to do, which is not have this problem. You could have sold, I said. No, she said, like the word was a wall. Okay. He built this place, he loved this place. I'm not selling it off so someone else can have what he made. She paused. Does that sound foolish? No, I said, it sounds like loyalty. November came, and with it the cold that doesn't fool around in that country. The kind of cold that gets into metal, into wood, into the ground itself, and changes the quality of light so everything looks like it was etched rather than grown. I was riding to the Voss place every morning still, staying an hour or two, sometimes longer. Prout's boy had never gotten his reprimand for the gate. I'd made a point of that. Didn't make a scene. I'd had my say quietly in Prout's office 3 days after the incident. Told him what I knew. Prout had looked uncomfortable and said he'd handle it. I had no way of knowing if he had. But I figured if I pushed too hard I'd get fired, and then I'd be of no use to anyone, least of all the woman 3 miles north who still had 4 weeks left on her splint, and a winter coming fast. The heifer dropped her calf on a night when the temperature went to 15 below, and I slept in the Voss barn rather than ride back to Prout's in it. Clara came out at 2 in the morning with a lantern and a coat thrown over her nightgown, and we worked together in the stall, me doing the lifting and the physical management and her directing, this hand here. Watch the cord, she's tiring, give her room, and at the end we had a live calf on fresh straw and a cow that was fine, and Clara looked at me across the newborn in the lamplight and said, "Good," and I didn't know if she meant the calf or me. I thought about that later. I put a blanket on the fresh straw and lay down next to the calf to keep it warm, the way you do, and Clara sat on the stall board above me with her lantern, and we were both tired and not talking for a while. "You don't have to keep coming," she said, into the quiet, not like she wanted me to stop. More like she was making herself say it. "I know," I said. "The arm comes out of the splint in 3 weeks. Buddy's learning fast." "He is." I'm saying you've done more than you needed to, more than any neighbor would have done. I looked at the calf. Its eyes were bright and stupid and new. Is that what I am, a neighbor? She didn't answer right away. I don't know what you are, Cal. The way she said it, my name, just my name, plain, with the tiredness in her voice. 3 in the morning and a newborn calf between us. Something in that went through me in a way I hadn't felt since I didn't know when. Get some sleep, I said. You're on the floor of my barn. Warmer than Prout's loft. She made a sound, almost a laugh, then quiet. I listened to her breathing slow above me, and to the cow and calf settling, and to the wind going at the barn walls like it had somewhere to be. And I lay there in the dark and thought about things I hadn't let myself think about in a long time. The splint came off on a Friday. Doc Hennessy rode up from Calder and unwrapped the arm and moved it and asked Clara to move it and watched her face carefully and said, "Good. It's set well." Clara moved her arm back and forth, opened and closed her hand. The arm was thinner than the right one, the muscle gone down from weeks of no use. She didn't say anything about that. I noticed her notice it. Strengthen it gradually, Hennessy said. No lifting more than 5 pounds for another 2 weeks, then build slow. When Hennessy left, Clara stood in the yard and held her free arm up and looked at it. Just stood there with it raised in the cold air, like she was checking that it was still hers. I was at the water trough, fixing the latch on the feed gate not far. I kept working. Cal, she said. Come here. I set down the latch and walked over. She looked at me. She had both arms at her sides now. The cut above her eye had healed to a thin scar that she'd probably have for the rest of her life, pale and neat, disappearing into her eyebrow. I want to show you something, she said. She walked to the barn. I followed. She went past the stalls, past the calf that had grown thick and awkward in a month, and into the back corner where Garrett Voss had built a small workshop into the wall, shelves, a workbench, tools hung in their places. She stopped at the workbench and put her hand on it. He built this bench the first year, she said. I've been thinking about what you said about loyalty. I waited. I've been thinking about this ranch, what it needs, what I need. She turned and looked at me directly, those October-colored eyes, and said, I'd like you to stay. I didn't say anything. Not just mornings, she said. I mean permanently, as a hand. I can't pay you what Prout does, not yet, but I can pay something, and there's the room off the barn that Garrett used for storing tack. It's dry and there's a stove. I looked at the workbench, at Garrett Voss's tools hung in their places. You're asking me to leave Prout. I'm asking if you'd consider it. Why me? She looked at me like the question confused her. What do you mean, why you? There are younger men who'd work cheaper. I don't want a younger man, I don't want cheap. She said it flat, not unkindly, just true. I want someone who came into a cattle yard to pull me out without being asked, who slept on the floor of my barn to keep a calf warm, who knows cattle medicine and fence work and doesn't explain things to me like I'm slow. She stopped. I want someone I trust. It was cold in the barn, cold enough that her breath showed when she talked. It's a practical arrangement, I said, giving her the out if she needed it. She looked at me a long moment. Yes, she said, among other things. I stood there with that. I'll think on it, I said. All right. I thought on it for exactly 1 day. I went back to Prout's and worked my full day and ate my supper alone in the north barn loft with the cold coming up through the boards and the sounds of the ranch settling around me for the night. And I sat there a long time looking at the things I owned, which fit in a single saddlebag and a canvas roll. And I thought about what it meant to leave a place you'd been for 11 years, and whether I was leaving or going to something. Ellie came into my thoughts. She does that sometimes, not a haunting, more like a kind of reflex. I thought about what she would have made of Clara Voss. Thought she probably would have liked her, the directness of her, the way she was so clearly her own person even in the middle of need. Ellie had liked that quality in people. I thought about the tack room off the Voss barn, the small stove, dry. I thought about mornings on the Voss porch when Clara came out with her coffee and stood there looking at the ridge before she looked at anything else. The particular way she gathered herself for the day, as though she was making a private agreement with the next 12 hours. I thought about what she'd said, among other things. I wasn't a fool. But I also knew enough about myself to know that I could turn something good into nothing by thinking about it too hard. By adding up the reasons it didn't make sense, the age difference, the circumstances, the fact that she was 6 weeks past burying her husband, and I was a man who'd been alone so long I'd started to think of aloneness as a virtue. But there was also this. A woman who saw what I actually was, not what she needed me to be, not a fill-in for something lost, but the specific man who'd walked into a cattle yard and turned the animal and come to her and said, "I'm not going to drop you." And hadn't. I told Pruitt in the morning. He took it better than I expected. I don't know if that's because he'd seen it coming or because he was relieved not to have the business of the gate hanging over us anymore. Either way, he shook my hand and said, "She's lucky to have you." And I said, "Other way around." And he looked at me like that was the most words he'd ever heard me put together. I packed up in under an hour. The ride north was cold, the sky that particular hard blue of November mornings, the ground iron frozen under trappers' hooves. I came up the rise onto the Voss property and saw the smoke from the house and the smoke from the tack room, which meant she'd lit the stove in there already, knew I was coming, hadn't waited to see what I'd decide. I liked that confidence. Not arrogance, she wasn't the arrogant kind, but a reading of me she trusted more than I trusted myself. Buddy Crane was at the barn and looked both unsurprised and relieved when I rode in. "Morning, Mr. Briggs." "Morning, Buddy." I stepped down and tied Trapper and looked at the barn. "Heifer all right." "Fine, calf ate twice." "Good." I carried my roll and my saddlebag into the tack room and set them down. The stove was going, like I said. She'd put a blanket on the cot, folded neat. There was a hook on the wall for my hat and coat. Small things, practical things. The kind a person does when they've decided something and aren't going to make a production of it. I hung my coat. I stood there in the small room that smelled of leather and wood smoke, and a particular quality of cold being beaten back. I put my hand flat on the stove and felt the warmth coming up through the iron. I heard the porch door open, then her boots on the frozen ground unhurried. She came to the tack room door. She was in her work coat, hair pulled back, a dark scarf at her throat. Her left arm, the healed one, she held slightly different than the right, a little careful still, as if the memory of it was slower to leave than the injury itself. She looked at my roll on the floor, my bag beside it. "You stayed," she said. "Said I'd think about it." And thought about it. That landed, and she looked at me the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy, and they've just set it down. Not relief exactly. More like the ordinary surprise of your own hands when they're suddenly empty and you realize how long you'd been holding. She crossed the small distance between the door and where I was standing, and she reached up with her good hand and put it flat on my chest, right over where the cold had been working all morning, right over whatever was under the flannel and the old wool, and she held it there. Just held it. "Good," she said. I put my hand over hers, the bad-fingered hand, crooked and scarred and old. I put it over hers and held it there. We stayed like that a minute, maybe longer, the stove going, the wind at the boards, Trapper shifting his weight outside. All the ordinary sounds of a working place, a living place, just going on around us like they would all day and the next day and the day after that. I've been here 9 years now. I want to be plain about what that means, what it looks like, the actual texture of it, so nobody gets the wrong idea. It's hard. A small ranch in that country is always hard. The winters that seem to lean on you personally, the years the cattle prices drop, the spring that came too wet 2 years back and we lost feed and had to sell 4 head before we'd planned to. It's not a romance in the storybook sense. We fight, Clara and I, in the way practical people fight, about money and about what to fix first, and about whether the east fence can wait another season. She's right about as often as I am, maybe more, and there was a period of about 6 months where neither of us was right about the east fence and we both knew it and neither would say so. And then one morning she said, "The fence," and I said, "I know," and we spent 3 weeks fixing it. That's what 9 years looks like. Also this, the way she stands at the ridge in the morning, which she still does, gathering herself for the day. Still just for her. I don't interfere with that. I come out of the barn and I see her up there and I let her have it. The calf from that night in November grew out to a good beef animal, and we sold it at a decent price, and put the money into the roof on the south side that had needed doing for 2 years. The heifers had 3 more calves since. We're at 22 head now. The chickens I have lost count of. Buddy Crane works for us still, though he's 26 now and has a girl in town he'll probably marry. And I've started thinking about who comes after him the way you think about these things when you're 66, and you know that the operations you've built need to outlast you. My knee is worse in cold weather. The crooked finger doesn't bother me except at the start of a cold snap. I sleep better than I have in 20 years, which Hennessy says is because I'm not carrying the weight of solitude in my body anymore, which I thought was a very peculiar thing for a ranch doctor to say, but I didn't argue with it. Clara's arm healed. You wouldn't know, watching her work, that it had ever been broken. She does everything she used to do, everything and more, and there are mornings when I watch her handle a sick animal or string wire or figure something in her head that I haven't figured yet, and I think, what a woman, just that. Plain as that. What a good, particular, uncommon woman. She doesn't need me the way she needed me that first autumn. I want to be honest about that, too. The needfulness was real and it was the opening, but it's not what kept me or what keeps me now. She could run this place alone. She could have hired someone. She chose me. She saw what I was and what I was good for, and she chose me not out of desperation, not out of gratitude, but out of something she'd thought about and decided on the same way she decided everything, clearly and without fuss. Her choosing freely is the thing. That's the thing. I'm a man of 66 years with a bad knee and a crooked finger, and 11 years on one man's spread that I walked away from and decades before that I barely mention. And I am not a young man, and I am not a wealthy man, and I am not a man who has ever made a scene about himself or his worth. And a clear-eyed, particular, strong woman looked at all of that and said, "You." I'm not going to make a speech about it. I don't do speeches. But I'll tell you this. Some evenings, when the work is done and the stock is settled and Buddy's gone home and the sky's gone that deep cold green before dark, Clara and I sit on the porch Garrett Voss built, on the 2 chairs that were his, and we're quiet together the way 2 people can be quiet when they've earned it. She leans a little my way. Not much. Just a tilt of the shoulder, just enough that our arms are touching, and she wraps both hands around her cup, the left one just the same as the right now, and she looks out at the ridge. I look at her looking. That's all, that's the whole of it. I'm not a man who drops things.